Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Capital Sustainability Steering Committee for Tuesday, September the 17th. We've got a number of people on council joining us: Councillor Davidson, Councillor Liu, Deputy Mayor Godwin Chan, myself, and then virtually we've got Councillor Silvitz, Regional Local Councillor DePaulo, and Councillor Hsu. So I'd like to call this meeting to order, and I need a motion at this point to adopt the agenda. Okay, Regional Councillor Chan, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Disclosures of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Seeing none. We have an adoption of previous minutes for the Capital Sustainability Steering Committee held on June the 4th. Mover for that, Councillor Davidson. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We have no delegations today, but we do have a presentation from Gigi Lee, our Director of Financial Services, and this is going to be a bit longer presentation. So I'll pass the floor over to you, Ms. Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor West and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to provide an update on the Capital Sustainability Steering Committee on the comments received from the previous CSSE meetings and staff recommendations to reflect some of the insights from these meetings to inform the 2025 budget and forecast. Next slide, please. A very high-level agenda, what you can expect from this presentation, which also serves as a summary of Agenda 6.1 and the staff report that's in the package. It'll be a brief background and overview of what the committee has accomplished in 2024, a reminder of some of the financial challenges that are facing the city and will have to navigate through to ensure long-term financial sustainability. Last but not least, we do have staff's recommendations for the 2025 capital budget and forecast as the budget process is underway. Next slide, please. The committee has had 5 meetings so far in 2024. The first 2 meetings outlined the work plan and meeting schedule, so more of the administrative matters, along with the presentation of the 2025 to 2033 forecast as a backdrop providing context for future meetings. We then had a number of meetings that you see on this slide, starting from April 16th. We had those meetings where we focused on the specific master plans and highlighted the total costs with financial implications and some of the cost mitigating strategies. In these meetings, staff presented committee members with considerations, which generated a lot of really good discussions on strategies to see these plans come to fruition in a fiscally responsible manner. Today, I'm here to provide recommendations based on some of the feedback we heard to inform the 2025 capital budget. Also, we're going to have a presentation on the Operations Center and yard improvements. In October, I'll come before the committee again with the draft capital budget and to kick off the 2025 capital budget process and the deliberation before the budget committee. Next slide, please. I mentioned some of this on the earlier slide. So essentially, the Capital Sustainability Steering Committee was reinstated in 2023. We have had 5 meetings so far from January to June of this year. A lot of really good dialogue generated from those meetings. In those meetings, staff provided updates on the financial challenges facing the city, along with opportunities where we provided committee members with the opportunity to seek clarifications, ask questions, and really just offer general comments and feedback on the capital forecast and the master plans. What we've highlighted on this slide is some of the examples of the feedback that we got from the committee members that are very valuable for us as we move through the capital budget process. So as you can see on the slide, definitely with consideration of the long-term operating budget pressures when we're looking at some of the capital budget pressures. So recognizing that when the capital projects are completed, it will then eventually have an impact on the operating budget. Also using the findings from the CSSC and to report and also advocate, which we've done to other levels of government. I know in working with Lee's, there's been an announcement on additional grant opportunities. So those are things that we're constantly monitoring. Last but not least, something that I've highlighted on the slide is that we did in those meetings talk about the scope and perhaps the timing of some of these capital projects. It's really some of the strategies that we have to look at, and specifically in the parks presentation that we did, where we looked at a couple scenarios that we provided to the committee, where we looked at, what happens financially when we look at status quo and the projects that we have, versus perhaps another option or another scenario to look at it is deferring portions of some of these projects or perhaps extending the time frame. Also utilizing our reserves, which namely it's a cash in lieu parkland reserve fund, and also looking at adjusting the scope and the scale of some of these growth-related park projects so that we're able to save up funding for the North Leslie Community Center. So this is intended to provide a quick reminder as to some of the conversations we had. Obviously, the last meeting was in June, so I just wanted to make sure that we have that context before we go on to the next slides. Next slide, please. Again, just looking at some of the financial pressures that the city, not just the city of Richmond Hill, but a lot of the municipalities are facing. So what you see on this slide essentially is we do have the forecast of approximately $1.7 billion. In one of the meetings we presented to CSSC, we did highlight the shortfall in funding that we would have. So out of the $1.7 billion, we identified almost $400 million that was going to be unfunded. We also in those meetings talked about the legislative changes such as Bill 23, Bill 108, and more recently Bill 185. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was in front of council along with Gary Scanlon, where we provided an update and also the DC bylaw amendment so that we're able to recover some of the lost revenues in making sure that we're able now to amend our bylaw and start collecting DCs at 100%. In the June meeting, we did present a very high level of the asset management plan and the recommendations from the asset management plan. And the fact that there are recommendations from the plan in terms of the annual investments that are going to be needed and where we fall short right now. So overall, the asset management plan did recommend annual increases over the next little while to make sure that we're able to sustain and maintain the current service levels by 2051. So as you can see on this slide, when we reported the asset management plan out of Commissioner Mazzaro's shop back in June, we did identify the infrastructure renewal or the backlog of almost $300 million. Last but not least, what you see on this slide essentially is what we talked about when it came to the North Leslie Community Center. That is a new building, a community building that is envisioned within the recreation and culture plan, and also a very big ticket item within our 10-year forecast. We did identify at the time, although DCs or development charges would be the primary funding source for this building, there would be a shortfall. So we did have some discussions as to how we would address that. Next slide, please. So how does it all tie back to the CSSC and the 2025 capital budget? Essentially, the mandate of the committee really is to evaluate the long-term capital investment needs that are aligned with the community's expectations and also to ensure long-term financial sustainability. By coming here and seeking directions from the committee, staff can then implement a capital budget strategy that's aimed in achieving that. So in response to some of CSSC's comments over the last little while and the 5 meetings that we've had, staff started working on a 2025 budget and forecast, incorporating some of those feedbacks and comments. And you see that on the upcoming slide. So the key focus for staff throughout the last little while in working on the 2025 capital budget and forecast, it is about balancing the long-term financial health and the sustainability of the city, along with meeting the community's needs. So make sure that we are delivering the needs of the community and a growing municipality, but at the same time, being mindful of having to prioritize some of those projects to achieve the maximum community benefit because we are working within some financial constraints. Next slide, please. Highlighted on the slide, also in more detail within the staff report, are recommendations in the report in terms of revising some of the timelines on the key projects. So I do have the next slide that speaks to some of the timing and the changes of those key projects. Also, in the previous conversations, we did talk about minimizing the new parkland acquisition in that we're able to preserve some of that balance towards North Leslie, the community center, as well as perhaps other park revitalization projects in the community. It is definitely a recommendation from the asset management plan. Something that we talked about during the budget strategy process was that we'll need to increase the contributions towards the tax and rate supported reserve funds to make sure that our assets are maintained in a state of good repair. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue to look for alternative funding sources. I talked about the grant opportunity that has recently come up. So we'll be reporting back to council on that. And one of the topics that we talked about at the CSSC previously, I believe it was back in May, was the consideration of debt financing. With very mindful monitoring to avoid future financial strain. And from those meetings, we heard from members of the committee as to the appetite from this committee when it comes to borrowing. And definitely when we're working on the capital budget and forecast, we did have that consideration in mind as well. Something that we're looking forward to in 2025, something we mentioned in the last CSSC committee, is the need to reassess and reevaluate the service levels. So that's all going to be part of the process, which is essentially the third phase of the asset management plan work that's going to be undertaken in 2025. Last but not least is the consideration to pause on adding new master plans. We have a number of city master plans that are approved by council. We want to make sure that we're able to develop a financial strategy, or what we call the financial sustainability strategy, to fund those first before we consider adding new ones, because essentially then we want to make sure that we do have a sound financial plan in place before we add additional pressure. Next slide, please. So as I alluded to on the earlier slide, through this process, staff did take a look at the projects. And what you see on the slide essentially is the updated or revised timing for some of these key projects. So a lot of consideration has gone into the timing of the project and when it's actually needed within the staff report. We also talked about we provide an update within the staff report on the North Leslie Community Center, essentially based on the population growth and the trend that we're seeing. Staff are recommending that the timeline, the proposed timeline when it comes to the construction of the community center is postponed from 2026 to 2031 to better align with the growth that is coming into overall growth within Richmond Hill. So what you see obviously is other projects that are on this list, but what you notice essentially is just based on some of the feedback that we got from CSSC, we're looking at delaying or extending the time frame for some of these projects. So for example, Town Park Revitalization Phase 3 is now deferred from 2030 to 2032. We do have Town Park Phase 1 that is already on the book. So essentially what we're recommending is that we'll need to take a more extended timeline, a more of a phased approach to deliver some of these major park revitalization. One, to make sure we have the funding for them, so that as we're collecting development charges, so we're not depleting our reserves. So we are staggering some of these major park revitalization to make sure that we have collected sufficient funding for them. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, I'm here before you today essentially to recommend some of the changes, some of the strategies that we're taking, and also revision of the timelines for some of these key projects. And then I'll be back with the draft capital budget presented to the committee in October. So that will be before the draft budget is presented to Budget Committee. So essentially the idea is similar to what we've done with some of the other reports. We want to bring that to the committee and also to get committee's recommendation and feedback to the Budget Committee before we go through that formal process, which would then lead to the BCW, the Budget Committee's recommendation of the capital budget to the mayor. Also, for next steps, we're going to continue to focus on balancing fiscal responsibility. So it's not a one and done thing that we're doing here. We're going to continue to monitor. We're going to continue on an annual basis as we're doing the capital budget process, make sure that we're aligning the timing of the projects with the resources that are available, and also, referencing back to North Leslie to make sure that we are also aligning the projects, growth-related projects, to the timing of growth. We're going to continue to explore any alternative funding sources. I talked about grants being available earlier, so we're going to continue to do that to make sure that we're able to mitigate and minimize the funding shortfall. What we have in plan for 2025 is essentially the financial sustainability strategy. Our last strategy was adopted by Council in 2020. A lot has changed over the last little while, and then one of the mandate for this committee to reinstate this committee is to provide recommendations and also to approve an updated financial sustainability strategy. Mayor West, with that, that concludes the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. And in the spirit of capital sustainability, I appreciate that you're 10 minutes short of the maximum time allowed. Very good. So I'll bring it over to council at this time. We need, I guess, the motion for the receipt of the presentation at this time. You're gonna do it all at once? Okay. Well, okay. We need to open this up for, okay. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you. And thank you, Gigi, for your presentation. I guess first, I want to ask on page 5, it says renewal backlog. I think there was 200 and something million dollars. What does that mean? Renewal backlog, slide 5.
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson, I'm going to defer that to Commissioner Mazzaro.
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson, the backlog is what's contained within the 2024 asset management plan. And when that came to council, I identified all the different asset classes. And to the extent we have infrastructure that is unfunded, that needs to be rehabilitated at some point in the future.
So that 284 million isn't urgent, but has a clock on it. There's things that must be done. Like, are those things included in all the other estimates of what needs to be done? Or is this an extra 284 million? You know what I mean? Like, are these projects considered as we go along with things we must do to sustain? I remember when we had those meetings, there were the sort of red zone ones that had to be done. And then there were ones that, we would like to, but are all of the things, whether there was shortfalls or not, all in the estimates of what needs to be done as a whole?
To the chair to Councillor Davidson, anything that's related to core infrastructure, I would consider as must be done. It's a function of when our enterprise asset management system outlines when these investments and interventions need to be made. So the longer we take to make those interventions and rehabilitation projects, that backlog just increases. And therefore, the reason why we're always advocating for increased funding in these areas from our current and higher levels of government.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I'm asking for you is that we are kept abreast of what is next that we need, whether it was something that is part of the shortfall or not. Whatever needs to be done first is brought to council. The urgency remains the same. I guess I'm just confused by that separate line, so it's probably me. But I have full confidence that if something needs to be done, that will definitely be put at the list, at the top of the list, if I'm understanding the spending on capital projects.
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So that is correct. The reason why we separated that out, because it is a major component of the asset management plan. So essentially the $284 million represents the backlog. So investments that probably should have been made up to this point that haven't been made, right? So what that really means is the 284 that we haven't spent, well, you'll see now as a pressure in the future years. because as we see the assets, the condition of assets deteriorate, to the commissioner's point, some of these will now become red, which means, they're going to come up over the next year or the year after. That's where the conditional assessment of the asset takes place. So the really long answer is a big portion of the 284 is part of the 1.7 that you see at the top. So it is factored in, it is in the plan, it's not additional.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, is it, having been my first term, is this normal to have backlogs with those big numbers? Is this just the way municipalities are operated?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson, I would say that most municipalities have some backlog. However, to the extent or the magnitude of those backlogs that will allow you to ever catch up. So when you look at, as an example, the city of Toronto, an enormous amount of or infusion of funding may not ever get them to catch up. So we don't want to get to a point where catching up becomes unattainable. And the reason why we need to continue to invest today, otherwise, as the saying goes, kicking the can down the road more and more at some point leads us to a position where requesting the funding becomes extremely unpalatable, and we understand and appreciate that, but it becomes extremely difficult to catch up. So yes, to wrap up, it is normal to have backlogs. Again, it's the magnitude of those backlogs, which we need to keep a close eye on.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. On slide 7, I think we discussed last time, I just wanted to ask the status of new parkland acquisition. I think we had a brief discussion that if we, you can't not buy the limited land that's around if there's stuff to get. And that we would, I know I can only speak for myself, but I would prioritize buying the land and we'll put something on it later. Is that still something we're able to do? Or are we going to try to, are we still in a position to buy land and then do something with it later on? Or are we going to sort of pump the brakes on all of it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I'll answer this in place of the Commissioner of Planning. And I think that we would never stop buying parkland if a good opportunity came up. So it's not meant to imply that. If there is something that's identified in our parks plan that is a valuable piece of land to the city as part of our parkland system, we would certainly still bring that to council as a recommendation. It's not meant to totally eliminate parkland acquisition.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the debt financing, what was it? You said you heard us loud and clear. What was your vibe on that? What was or will we deal with this later on, whether we're going to go that route?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So when I brought the presentation forward, it was more of an education piece, but I think based on the feedback and the comments we heard at the meeting was, that is, I think in some of the councillors' words, that would be the very last resort. And that's the message I got, and I think that's the message most of us got from that conversation. That was definitely intended to bring to light to the committee some of the other options. So we're not, at some point we're going to run out of funding options. Then we would really talk about financing, how we're going to pay something. So just like a home, you're not going to have the $1 million up front. So now it's about financing, mortgaging the home. So we will, just like all the other municipalities, we will get to that point. So it is about carefully managing our resources right now. But to your point, definitely what I heard from that meeting was very last resort. And we want to look at other options first before we turn to debt financing.
Thank you. Excellent. The line here, second from the bottom, reevaluate service levels. How is that approached through you, Mr. Chair?
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson, the service levels that's referred to in this presentation are the service levels that we're going to address as part of the 2025 asset management plan. And it's the best example is probably roads and or bridges. They have a particular condition. Roads have a road condition index. Bridges have a bridge condition index, and we're going to establish levels of service to see what is most tolerable, financially sustainable without putting the city at risk. And that's a plan that all municipalities are going to be responsible to bring forward, and that's part of our exercise. So those are the types of levels of service. How bad do we want a road to get before we go and make an intervention and an investment to bring it up to a more modern or current standard of care?
Thank you. And my last question through you, Mr. Chair. I didn't see anything there about West Gormley. Is there anything on the books for the new development at north of Leslie on, north of Stouffville Road on Leslie? At some point, we were kicking around ideas and talking about a community center eventually. I don't recall exactly what the timeline is. So I might be out in left field. I know north. Did I miss it? Oh, I'm sorry.
But no, that's okay. I mean,
Okay,
it's worth
I didn't see it, but
I think we talked about this on slide 8. We put that up about the timeline for North Leslie being,
this is Gormley. Yeah,
Oh,
this is
I'm
north,
sorry.
yeah, this is north of, yeah, I know I get those two
My
mixed up too.
apologies.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there has never been a community center for West Gormley in any of the plans that we've brought to council for approval. So the answer, I
I
guess,
was
is
wrong
no.
there. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Through you, Mr. But was there talk at some point at least of a community park or some kind of sports something, or there is some plan for something for that community in some form sometime?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, as part of the development, there is parkland to be secured through the development applications. I believe there's one community park and 2 neighborhood parks.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all. Thank you so much.
okay, Regional Local Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Gigi, and your team. And certainly everyone is involved. I have no problem with recommendation A, receive, of course. Looking at the recommendation and is mentioned in the staff report and is presented slides, increased contributions, number 3. So we in 2024 this year budget already increased this capital sustainability index contribution to 1.5%. Is that kind of perhaps somewhere later in October, potentially just like the Bank of Canada, or they go the other direction, coming down 11.25%. Would that mean, I'm not concerned about, she's not concerned. I'm not asking for the magnitude. Would that be potential looking at when the capital budget for 2025 coming in, maybe 1.75 or something, through you, Mr. Chair? I just try to get a sense. Is it just a hint? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through Mayor West, the chair, to the deputy mayor. Yes, I think I wouldn't say it's a hint for 2025, but it's definitely something that staff, we have been communicating for a number of years now, is that there is, going back to our earlier comment about the $284 million backlog and the shortfall when it comes to tax-supported and rate-supported infrastructure. So I think when we presented back in June to council or budget committee, this committee, is that in the long term, we need to look at increasing the contribution. So you're right, from a tax-supported standpoint, it is looking at increasing the 1.5% to a higher percentage so that we are able to address the backlog and the infrastructure needs. So I don't have that percentage.
Okay, thank you. I know, of course, we don't have a crystal ball in front of us, but it doesn't seem to be, based on what I read and in the report as well, presumably is not getting abundance of capital coming in the next couple of years. Sorry, you want to make a point, Mr. Chair? You raise your hand.
Sorry.
No, I haven't asked a question yet. I just
Okay.
can't comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I do see in the staff report and also what we're talking about, we really have addressed what are the real critical needs versus wants, right? Because ideally, we want this. Now really come down to back to almost like basics, so to speak. What a basic thing we need to have for that. I try to get a sense that in your exercise or staff exercise of prioritizing, I see that at least two critical indicators. One is what are the demonstrated needs? I use the word demonstrated. The second one is the greatest benefit. Through Mr. Chair, could staff give me a sense of what sort of quantitative or qualitative kind of indicators you're looking at to come up with that priority list? I know it's not pure science, so I would like to know what are the sense, because at some point in time, I guess we all as council members have to elaborate with residents about this challenging exercise. Mr. Chair.
Through the chair to Deputy Mayor Chan, so perhaps I can take a first stab at it, and then I'll turn to the commissioner. So essentially, when we look at capital, so if I understand the question correctly, it is about how we assess and prioritize capital, right? So we do have a mechanism or a system in place where we really look at a prioritizing system in which we assign a score to a particular project. So it is, to your point, it is somewhat scientific. So essentially, we do apply a score. So we looked at from an asset standpoint, what we call a risk assessment score or enterprise or asset management score. So essentially, it looks at the life of the asset, the condition of the asset, so really a lot of different factors that go in which then we get a scores to, do we need to replace it now? There's also a risk factor. Can we wait another year? So just imagine we have a ton of projects and we apply that methodology to pretty much all the projects that we do. So when we come before council, or even when we come before senior leadership and then the committee, it is a list of projects that have been prioritized, vetted, and again, to your point, it is a list of projects that provide the greatest benefit to the community as a whole within the financial constraints that we have.
Through the chair to Councillor Chen, yes, just to complement what the treasurer has indicated, as part of the evaluation and prioritization, the other item that is compliance with legislative requirements. There's a lot of projects that have legislative requirements that are not nice to have, should do's, they are must do's. As it relates to infrastructure, there's delegated authorities from the province in a lot of areas that require municipalities to undertake projects as well. So wanted to qualify that. And again, when it comes to the prioritization, what has improved over the last several years is this prioritization happening in advance of a budget coming to council, whereas in the past, all the departments pretty much put their things together and it was presented to council. We are now evaluating one asset in one department versus an asset in another department. We're linking some of the projects to our council strategic goals and plans as well. So we use that as an initial shakedown of all of our needs and then determine, what sort of changes might need to be made at that point to ensure that the community is getting the best value for its dollar. When it comes to infrastructure itself, the system that we employ for asset management very clearly outlines every piece of asset that the city owns, understands the life of that asset and the interventions that are required at what times for that asset. And it basically, let's call it the big, computerized program, spits out a program for us that we don't take at face value. We go and we unpack it and validate. And that's where every year at capital budget, we talk about the amount of money that's spent on condition assessments. We go and validate that information because sometimes something can wait and we push out a little bit longer. However, something may have deteriorated faster and we need to advance. So that level of sophistication goes into everything that the budget brings forward to you annually.
Thank you for the answers. It does for me, it's more comforting to hear that is actually vigorous programming, as I'm hearing from our commissioner, although engineering numbers, whatever. But I gather just a comment is it all depending what the assumption that goes in, right? Whatever comes out is based on from the little thing that I can see. But that is forever changing. Now, one last question, and maybe I make a comment. It's good that we always be searching and continue to look for public-private partnership, collaboration, naming of facility and funding. And I had not too long ago a meeting at one of the YMCA sites in your region, whereas I guess now we're dealing with new top management there. They seem to be also express an interest that if an opportunity, so I'm just mentioning it. The question is, to what extent that there is a particular work plan on that? We can keep talking about, is there a work plan that to the extent the staff may be working on to really try to maybe identify at least one or two those potential partner we can work with, or is it really in the flux? Through Mr. Chair, is that really identify targeted partners at this point in time we might be looking at, or this is just ongoing whenever opportunity arises through you?
Are you talking about sponsorship?
Well, sponsorship, partnership, yeah.
Not really sure.
Meaning basically bring extra help in terms of funding. It seems to be ongoing things, but do we have a particular target? You know, we hope by October 2025, there'll be at least one partner. That's the kind of question, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have a specific target in terms of the number of partners, but we are constantly thinking about whether particular projects might benefit from working with particularly other public agencies. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know sometimes it's all depending whether there's any particular opportunity of collaboration and so on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, staff, for all presentation. It's certainly not easy to say defer, extend. But unfortunately, I do realize that the reality is we don't have that much dollars. So more work to be done, but thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff.
Okay, Councillor Silovitz.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to staff and for the presentation. I just have one question through you, Mr. Mayor, probably to Commissioner Massaro. When we talk about the civic precinct area that we want to reform or reconstruct into some kind of a some kind of a city place, from a motion that was moved, I believe it was last year, by Councillor De Paulo, and I seconded. Can you tell me whether or not we are looking at furthering those discussions in this term, or do we have to project it out because it's not what would be considered, as you said previously, a must or a should? How far up or down that list would the civic precinct lie?
Through the chair to Councillor Silovitz, yes, those conversations have been advancing, and there's an intent to continue and advance the master planning exercise through Commissioner Galanis's team, after which we'll move into detailed design in 2025. To your point about prioritizing projects like that versus infrastructure projects, that is always the balance that we aim to strike between the amenities that benefit the community with the infrastructure needs that are necessary to be undertaken at any given point in time.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. And good to hear that it is moving along, and we'll have more detailed discussion in 2025. I really appreciate that. I do believe that it is an entity that should be constructed as something that is very specific to all residents' usage. And while maybe not infrastructure, it's certainly something that can be used as a central gathering place for our residents. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Shu.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I completely understand the financial challenges we are dealing with, but with the Provincial Bill 185 now in effect, and our city can collect a portion of development charges. So do you think this could help ease some of our challenges?
Through the chair to Councillor Shu, definitely with Bill 185 and through some of the work that we already provided back to council in terms of the DC bylaw, we do anticipate that the pressures from development charges will ease. So essentially, we're able to collect at 100% development charges right now, whereas before we were only at 80%. So the financial pressures are eased that way. We also have now studies, growth-related studies that are now once eligible. But ultimately, within the framework of Bill 23, there were other exemptions and discounts that are still existing. So even though Bill 185 rolled back some of those changes in which we're able to collect more DCs, there are still changes from the initial Bill 23 that are still in place. So that still limits our DC collection. So when it comes to a lot of the exemptions and the discounts for affordable housing, rental housing, et cetera, so those are still in place. So they are still a pressure to the city.
I see. My next question through the chair is, I've noticed that many projects, 9 projects in the DDO park have been suspended or postponed. Is there any flexibility to make changes to just some of the projects rather than all of them? It sounds a lot there, but is there any flexibility to only make some changes for some of them?
Through the chair of the councillor, there's always opportunity to make changes. What staff brings forward is based on the financial pressures that we have and the need to spread out delivery of these projects. At the end of the day, council has the opportunity to direct staff to advance or push back projects.
Okay. My next question is similar with Deputy Mayor Chen, is about the alternative funding sources, such as a public-private partnership. And my specific question is, are there any city projects or programs going on that involve public-private partnership already? And any other projects where we could potentially work with the private sector as partnership? Through the chair.
Through the chair to Councillor Shu. So maybe I can start off first. So to my knowledge, we have been exploring an option with AMO, and that is for the North Operations Center. So the North Operations, the Connor Center. So we have had discussions. So that is another level of government where they've actually launched not a grant program, but a loan program. So essentially, it's borrowing. This is where in this arrangement, they would provide us with a partial grant, provided that we borrow the remaining funds from them, and also they would charge us interest on it. So there are programs out there that we're exploring. This one specifically I've been a part of, but definitely there are other considerations as well. So in this situation, for example, we need to make sure that the cost of borrowing do not outweigh the benefits of having the grant, right? So we need to make sure that it still financially makes sense for the city. So that's one that I am aware of.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to that, traditionally, public-private partnerships are big projects that a private entity would have an interest in because of the scope of and the complexity of it. So we are constantly evaluating our opportunities for that sort of thing. But a lot of the projects that we have, there would be no value for the private entity to be involved in that project, really. So while we continue to look at it, we don't have any that are truly private-public partnerships right now, which I think was your question.
Okay, I see. My last comment is not a question, just a comment. And we can see another recommendation is to re-evaluate service levels to match the city's financial capabilities. So I'm concerned about the potential service cuts, especially in light of the tax hike. That's my last comment. And that's all about my comments. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the report. I'm not part of this committee, but it caught my attention when I look at the agenda because, you know, I can see North Leslie is all in Ward 3. I'll start with a question. So on my email from clerk, which is a presentation, the slide 8, the revised timelines. Actually, I have 6 items, but on your presentation, there is no sports dome air conditioning. Is this on the list or not, Mr. Mayor?
Through the mayor to Councillor Liu. So there was a typo. So it's 5, what you see on the presentation and in the staff report.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. So I don't have any questions because I understand the financial challenges, but you know, as a Ward 3 councillor, when I look at you know, out of the 5 or 6 items, it's like 4 of them are in Ward 3. The sports dome I can understand. Bayview Hill Park revitalization phase 2 from 2030 to 2034. I can accept that because we're already undergoing the phase 1. But for the North Leslie, 2026 to 2031, both the West Local Park and the community center. I read the report, I understand the population and all that, but it's quite concerning to me because we have people move in North Leslie already like 3-4 years ago. So by the time they get a community center, they get a park, they're already from kindergarten and they graduated from high school. I don't know what we can do, but I just wanted to express deep concern on this delay. Even though I understand all the challenges, I just want this committee to please reconsider this. It looks to me that, you know, the North Leslie residents has been, you know, being thrown under the bus on this one because it's all North Leslie and people are moving in now and they're living there for like 4 or 5 years. And with the more homes built faster, I expect people moving in more faster and the population will definitely increase. So I don't know what, I don't have a solution. I just wanted this committee to be aware that this is a critical, these are critical infrastructures for the North Leslie residents. I already received complaints about there haven't been a park built yet in the North Leslie, and you know, when it delayed to like 2031, I'm really concerned. So that's all my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Councillor DiPaolo. You're still on mute. I got a text from Regional Councillor DiPaolo a few minutes ago that he is having new computer issues, so it's possible that may be contributing to this.
He's frozen.
Oh, there we go. You're frozen there.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead, Councillor. Yep.
You can hear me now. Okay, well, I got a brand new laptop today. Swapped out my original issue from 6 years ago, and I haven't figured out how to get the camera working. So I jumped on my phone. Thank you for your patience there. So, Councillor Yu makes an extremely good point. The North Leslie residents shouldn't have to bear the brunt of our financial concerns here in the city. I have recognized in the past that perhaps we have to change what we've done in the past, and maybe not have a full-fledged community center here. But I do think it's important, and I'd love to find creative ways. So, through you, Mr. Mayor, does the North Leslie proposed community center have a hockey arena proposed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there is at least one ice pad proposed. We are planning to do a needs assessment next year to determine exactly how many ice pads are required by the city moving forward, and how many would be at that facility specifically.
Okay, so in answer to Councillor Hsu's question, there wasn't any legitimate private-public partnership opportunities established, and the answer was given that there wouldn't be a private interest or a profit-making opportunity that they would want to venture with the city. But other municipalities are using private sector partnerships to build arenas, and there's revenue opportunities. And I'll just ask that question again with specific reference to hockey arenas. Is there not a way that we could partner with someone that can bear some of the cost if we alternately provide a revenue opportunity?
I think
Through you,
CAO Jocelyn had her hand up, Councillor. So can we allow her to step in here? Go ahead, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, what generally is the best opportunity when you're building a brand new community center is to get an interested party before you put the shovel in the ground. The Magna Center in Newmarket is an example of that. There's a reason it's called the Magna Center, but we do have a naming rights committee that could look at different public partner opportunities. A lot of the arena partners that you're talking about, like Canlan, et cetera, they're arena-only facility. They're standalones. This is a multi-purpose community center that would house more than just the arena. But there may be opportunities for naming rights within it. Councillor Steele is correct that before we embark on anything, we would be undertaking a feasibility study that will then confirm the need for all of the components, be it arena, pool, fitness, the gymnasium, and the meeting spaces. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you. I was thinking beyond naming rights. I'm sure you're investigating that approach, and it's an unusual circumstance where someone would put a substantial amount of our cost in toward just getting a naming right, and something to look into. But I'm not talking about national training rinks, or I'm talking about companies that will operate the rink, that we give up the revenue, but in exchange for them absorbing some of the capital costs. And if it's only been done in standalone arenas and never in conjunction with a community center, I still think maybe we can get creative and be the first ones to do so. And we share capital costs and provide the community center, but the arena components, which I'm sure is a major expense, is borne by a private entity. And I don't know if that can be done. I'm just hoping that we can remain open-minded to all options and hopefully deliver this community center as proposed.
Okay, any comment further comment? Oh, go ahead, City Manager.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the appropriate next steps in that regard, I mean, there may be some opportunities, I don't know, it's something that we would have to look at. You know, Arena Ventures have an opportunity to, you know, for a PP. Some of the other operations will not because of the sheer expense of operations, like pools, as an example. I think the appropriate next step is once a feasibility study is undertaken, then staff would be reporting back to council on the components, identifying the need for the components associated with North Leslie. And it's at that time that council would have to direct staff as to what your wishes might be in terms of that PP.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate, staff's willingness to explore these possibilities, though. I think, a good point was made. I mean, we certainly, don't want this particular new area of the community not to be without a reasonable level of amenities. And I think the opportunity to be creative, as is pointed out here, is kind of the thing. Is there anybody else that wants to speak at this time round two? Okay, I'll come back to that. So just from a couple of comments for me, it's been a good conversation. Thank you. I do agree with the idea of the kind of pausing our focus on new parkland acquisition. I mean, the reality is right now that we have parkland funds that could be used, and if we're not going to be using them necessarily to be focused on larger parcels of parkland to acquire, but finishing the parkland pieces that we have or making better use of the parkland that we have, I think the result probably is more efficient to, at this point in our history, to be, reinvesting some of that money into parkland that can be used better. And a good example of that is the Civic Park at Major Mackenzie and Yonge. I think there's a real need for a park right on Yonge Street and that could be used from some of our higher density developments going forward, and a place that we can gather as a community. The land's there. We've had it forever. We just haven't done anything really substantial with it. So I think that's an efficient way to use some of these funds rather than acquiring the land and then also having to program it. So I also appreciate the comment that was made about debt financing. I mean, I have thought about this. We've talked about this for quite some time. I do understand there are actually some advantages to debt financing that may be able to address needs that are urgent and that can be done now and then paid for over a period of time rather than waiting a really long time and then doing it, but you've lost that time in between. So I think I do appreciate the fact that it's the last priority on the list, but I think we need to know everything we need to know so that we have the entire toolbox laid out in front of us. I think that's it for me. I think I agree with this, with the general direction that we're going with this approach. I think at the end of the day, the whole, we call this the Capital Sustainability Committee, but really this is the juggling all the things we want to do and have to do that would benefit our community with the amount of resources that we have available to us, which in no way matches our needs. So, but I think Capital Sustainability Steering Committee is probably catchier. So let's just continue with that name, I guess. So I guess we've got a couple of people that would like to speak on a second round. When are this motion that's ahead, that's with us right now, I mean, we probably should have that moved, right? So why don't we, Regional Local Councillor Chan, do you want to move the motion? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I did say, yeah, I thought it'd be moved. So A and B, I think each one of us have given our comments regarding certain aspect on that, and also in reacting to the presentation, the staff report today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this opportunity to seek some clarification or question in the second round. It's certainly, I for one, I'm sure we are looking for creative approaches, whether internally, externally, with partners and so on and so on. But also it seems to be we already have some kind of proven or demonstrated partnership with other public bodies. By that, I'm referring to number one is Land Staff Community Center, which is actually tri-level or tri-party arrangement. The two school boards as well as the city. There's one opportunity. And as well, right in where Councilor New mentioned about, we also have Richmond Green Library Branch and Richmond High School. So I think those in terms of trying to hopefully align the priorities in terms of timelines and working with the two public boards, the school board, I hope that might be something that council might hear back, okay, this is perhaps an opportunity to maybe, I don't know, expedite by 1 year, 9 months or whatever. That would be helpful. The other one, I'm glad to hear Treasurer Lee talking about AMO does have the one or whatever funding pool that provide money to different municipalities, like a financial institution, almost like Infrastructure Ontario. And speaking about Infrastructure Ontario, is that also those are potential provincial funder for infrastructure, which is most of these are capital. Maybe I don't need to answer now, but maybe there's something to would be helpful to take a look at that. And I do understand actually both region and our city treasurer belong to the Ontario Financial Officers Association. I'm sure the struggle we're dealing with is not alone in Richmond Hill. So I would dare to say almost everyone, 444 Ontario municipalities are facing, it's just different magnitude, but the same kind of challenges. So perhaps looking in those external bodies with 1,000 minds working together might have something to share. So I'm looking for an opportunity maybe in future when we report back either through this committee or through council at a different time would look at those options. Two public school boards, established track record, we have some of that. The AMO's debt financial mortgage, the one, I think it's called. And maybe that's a two-shooter question. The finance minister of Canada just talking about for first-time buyer, for example. I know it's not related, but is looking at extending mortgage period for first-time buyer from 25 to 30 years. I don't know to what extent, maybe that goes back to the Ontario Financial Officers Association. Would that maybe that's something to look at for the municipal financing, mortgaging will also have extended timeline. I'm not sure that may be answer there, but I'm just raising those points to tap into whatever resources out there and hopefully can hear back report some point in time during the capital budget cycle. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I completely understand Councillor Liu's perspective, and he's here to advocate for his community. But I do recall when we bought our house, we moved in 1999 in Oak Ridges, and the Oak Ridges Community Center, I think, opened in 2012. So I'd like to know what is the average time it takes. When I read the plan for the North Leslie, it felt ambitious compared to how long it took for my neighborhood to get a community center. What would you say is on average, and how long it does take to get the money together? And I don't expect him to stop trying to get for his neighborhood. Absolutely, that's why he's here. But what is an acceptable period of time on average?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I would first say that the community service levels are calculated on a citywide basis. They are what the need for the community center is not just based on the North Leslie community itself. It's based on the need for a pool, for example, across the city as a whole. So in the staff report, we use the example of gymnasiums. I believe we have a service level for the city in terms of gymnasiums, and when will our population generate the need for the next one? That's what's triggering the North Leslie Community Center. It's not that community itself. And the reason for that is because community centers are generally drive-to facilities that are used by the residents of the city as a whole. So I didn't answer your question at all, I realized.
That's okay.
I don't know the timing. The city manager might know the timing of community centers for specific communities a little better than me, but I think that we have to keep in mind that it's serving the city as a whole.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess so there are different timelines depending on the different needs, and it's a bigger picture than just financial, which is what we're talking about here. There's a whole bunch of things that go into that decision.
Yes, that's correct. And that's what the explanation in the staff report is about. We're actually, so the recreation plan recommendation for the timing was based on the 2016 census data. And what we're doing is we're going back and looking more closely at that with the population data that we know now today, which is 5 years more than what we had then, because now we have the 2021 census as well as actual housing starts. And we're actually making the recommendation that we feel the recreation plan would have made if they were privy to the information that we have now. So we're trying to make sure the service level recommended in the recreation plan is what we're going by.
Thank you.
I think we have exhausted our speakers list then. So we have a motion on the floor under the agenda 6.1. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. All right, so we're moving on to Operations Center and yard work improvement. And we've got Director Frank is from Public Works Operations here to speak to us. And thank you very much, Director. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good afternoon. So let's flip to the first slide. So the objective of the staff report that you have in front of you is to provide an update on the growth-related capital improvements to the Operations Center, recommend some alternate approaches to implementing the works that were designed but remain to be constructed. These are designs that are sitting on the shelf, shovel-ready. And to recommend an alternate approach to the 2019 Capital Sustainability Steering Committee direction that was given at that time. Next slide. So you're familiar with the Operations Center. It's 1200 Elgin Mills East. It's the hub of all public works operations activities in Richmond Hill. It's operated on a centralized model, so single facility services the entire city, as opposed to some other larger municipalities that would have a centralized hub and then satellite facilities. In our case, it's one location. The master plan study for the Operations Center was completed a long time ago, so that was 1999. It got an update in 2003, and there was a review of it in 2016. This at the time was intended to be a 20-year plan. We're now 25 years later. In our view, it's generally obsolete, but it's still really our only formal document to plan some of our public works facilities. So it's still active. I'm reluctant to continue to refer to it as a master plan. At this point, it's more a collection of remaining projects that need to be implemented. Next slide. So the work completed over the 25 years was executed in two phases. Phase one was completed before 2010 and primarily addressed the fire administration area. They also some training facilities for fire and also the outdoor fire training facility out in the backyard, if you're familiar with the back end of the yard. They also had some various internal improvements to the building that were constructed for them. For public works, the benefits that we got out of that was the salt storage building, there was a truck wash station, fuel island, and also some other miscellaneous internal improvements. After 2016, a feasibility study on the remaining master plan recommendations, as well as the detailed design of those remaining works was completed. And during that time, there were two urgent repairs, roof replacement, and a retaining wall in the back that was falling over. Next slide. So next, I'm going to walk you through the various elements, and this clerks will have to click through and we'll have each of the elements show up, although I see everything seems to be showing up on the screen. Okay. Had it been the PowerPoint, you would have seen the individual sections. So just to summarize, at the top of the screen is the new decanting facility. And this would be to comply with current regulations relating to handling of wet materials. The current facility we would not be able to build the current facility today. It's based on a bygone era in terms of standards and regulations. So if that facility were built today, it would have to incorporate some significant additional improvements to it. As you come down, the other piece would be the material covered storage. This is basically covered storage for the granular materials, for soils, for mulch, and that kind of stuff. It's the bulk storage that's in the back end of the plant, or back end of the yard. Next would be the frost-free storage, and I'll come back to that one in a couple of minutes. Also, the north and south canopies, these are basically just covered areas under which we would park off-season equipment just to keep them out of the elements. There's the renovation of the salt shed and truck wash area. These are existing buildings with large rooms that are being vastly underutilized. So the proposal is basically to refurbish those rooms and turn them into proper storage. And then the big one is the one that encompasses the entire site, and that's the civil works. So the civil works is what we consider to be our highest priority initiative. So it includes water, wastewater, stormwater, lighting, which are all generally non-existent or insufficient across most of the yard. A significant portion of the yard was never properly serviced, and activities and usages have created drainage and stormwater issues that need to be addressed. Once the services are done, then there's a full repaving of the backyard that's necessary. Just putting in the services will cut up the pavement so badly that it'll need a full repaving. And all of that can be, what we've done is we've broken it out, and we've assumed that's basically a 2-year initiative. Next slide. So in 2019, the last time this came to CSSC, committee directed us to do a value engineering review of the designed works. With the lost time during COVID and some uncertainty regarding what our needs would be post-COVID, the value engineering never took place. Since our recommendation now is to defer the proposed frost-free storage building, we believe the VE now is no longer needed. Instead, however, what we would recommend is a long-term needs assessment that should be carried out, given that we're now well beyond the time horizon of the original master plan. The city has grown a lot since 1999. The size and nature of future city growth should dictate the yard improvements that are needed. In other words, utilize the future vision and the future growth of Richmond Hill to project what we need that yard to look like in the future. And just before moving on, I'll just make a comment on value engineering. So I have a lot of career experience doing VE reviews. VEs are an excellent tool in complex works for projects that require some sophisticated technology or there are some serious constructability issues. None of that really applies here. In particular, once we removed the frost-free facility, the building itself was intended to be fairly basic. The interior of the building was somewhat complex in terms of mechanical. But once that's out of the equation, the VE really is not necessary anymore. So with that, next slide. So in this table, I've kind of summarized the proposed game plan. So this is the plan if funding were no object. This is how we would sequence the work. 2026 would be the operational needs assessment. 27 and 28 would be the more pressing civil works. That's what the servicing the backyard that culminates with a repaving. 29 would include the existing storage buildings and the new decanting facilities. And 2030 would be all the remaining works. As I said, the frost-free would be deferred pending the results of the needs assessment and also future DC background studies, because we're suggesting that cost needs to be built into those background studies. So the total cost of all this is now $26.26 million over the 5-year period. Next slide. So these are all issues that we think we need to keep in mind, and I'll apologize, some of it might seem a bit repetitive, but first of all, as I said, the 20-year master plan is now 25 years old and really no longer reflects our future needs and priorities. Next, the ops yard is now landlocked, so we will be space constrained in the future. Some limited relief from the refurbishment of the Connor Building in Oak Ridges is expected to be of good use to us, and that's a very good project. So it's a good project. It will benefit Oak Ridges, but will do very little in terms of relieving some of the stresses in the operations yard. Public Works will need to vacate the cattle barn at Richmond Green at some point and may need to turn the building over. The building is approaching end of life, so in any case, some improvements or a rebuild would be necessary in the future for PWO to continue to remain there. You may be aware that the Richmond Green Master Plan, one of the recommendations likely coming out of that master plan is for Public Works to vacate the cattle barn and to turn that over. As we stand right now, we have no space in the yard to accommodate all the equipment that's stored in that facility. So an alternate plan would have to be put in place. Construction of the new John McCrae Street immediately to the west of the yard is now nearing completion, and so it creates a hard western boundary for the operations center. And finally, we know that continued growth is eventually going to strain the capacity of the site to sustain PWO activities. Now, I want to point out that strain is there today. It doesn't impede the delivery of services. There is no pressing drop-dead issue that needs to be resolved at this moment in time. But I think, as pointed out in the previous presentation, kicking the can down the road means that there are bigger issues that need to be addressed later on. Next slide. Next, let's look at funding sources, and I'll just point out that the next few slides are presented for you at a very high level, and they were to complement some of the material from the previous presentation. So the operations center work is to be funded 80% through development charges and 20% from tax-supported reserves. The last development charge background study assumed a cost of $18.5 million. So that was an estimate that was provided in 2019. So here we are 6 years later, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, that estimate is now $26.26 million. All that testament to the fact that construction never gets cheaper. Construction activity becomes more expensive with time. We never buy construction activity down the line that's cheaper than what it would be today. That's the simple reality. Next slide. So this then is the impact of the DC-funded Public Works Reserve Fund if we were to proceed with all the work detailed a few slides ago in that sequence. In other words, no gaps from year to year. The reserve has a current balance of $2.04 million, which starts to be depleted next year as the Connor Building goes to construction. The reserve goes into a deficit in 2025. The deficit is generally modest for a few years until 2027, when the operations center projects then start to draw on the reserve funds. You can see that the negative balance peaks out in 2029 before starting its road to recovery. The total inflows into the reserve fund over this 10-year period on the graph is expected to be about $19.68 million. The total outflows are almost $31.9 million. So in general, over this 10-year period, we're talking about a deficit of $12 million over the 10-year period. The next DC background study will need to update the timing and cost of all these projects in order to recover from future development. Next slide. So let's quickly just summarize again at a very high level some possible funding strategies, and you heard some of this stuff in the previous presentation. As mentioned, finance staff will be reporting back on these in advance of the 2026 capital budgeting process. First of all, shorten the time to the next DC background study to include some escalated cost and revised implementation schedule. As well, use the operational needs assessment, and we think that can be a valuable tool to really flesh out what true costs should be and have those costs then incorporated in a DC update. Secondly, explore alternate funding or financing options, particularly for the years post-2027. Next slide. So in summary, our recommended next steps are as follows. Defer construction of the proposed frost-free, cancel the previously approved value engineering, proceed with the designed works subject to funding using the multi-year phased approach outlined in the staff report. phasing to be confirmed based on funding availability. And I'll point out here that the plan as it stood in 2019 and the set of drawings that I have in my office for this project had everything bundled together. So what we presented in that table was a decoupling and spreading out and phasing, again, consistent with some of the principles that were talked about in the previous presentation. We would propose to re-engage the 2019 design consultant to break the designed work into smaller contracts and prepare the first set of tender documents. Next slide. And then we'd start a new operational needs assessment, develop the plan and roadmap that takes into account the future city growth, advance the next DC update so that the updated timelines and costs can be incorporated. And then finally, finance staff will be exploring and reporting back on those alternate funding options. So that's the presentation. I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, members of the committee. Why don't we get the motion on the floor? Who would like to move that? Councillor Davidson, do you want to start us off?
You know it. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't know in detail a lot of the things listed here. I'm assuming the cattle barn is the great big where we all got a tour of all the winter like the windrow tractors and stuff. That's the barn you're talking about.
Through the chair. It's over on Richmond Green.
Right.
And I don't know how best to describe it.
It's beside the picnic shelter.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Like,
Oh, yeah,
it's that barn.
Right, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Are there any of these projects that are put it this way, are staff at any risk because these projects really need to be done, like uneven pavement or whatever? I guess I'm trying to figure out which ones are the most urgent.
Through the mayor, I'd say no at this point. And this is why, to some extent there is flexibility and there is the opportunity to introduce gap years in the schedule that's put forward. What I've given you here is in essence a breakdown of the program, the projects that were in place in 2019 and got shelved. So my task was to repackage what was left in terms of the 2019 projects, to put them in a schedule that is somewhat implementable, and to present to you what the impact would be in terms of funding sources and the financing. At the end of the day, the yard is in fair condition. There are things that need to be done. I made reference earlier to the decanting facility, which from a regulatory standpoint, we would never be able to do today. There are other needs in the facility that need to be met, and a lot of them revolve around space. So you'll appreciate that when you visit the facility, on any given day, a whole bunch of equipment is out. The off-season equipment is stored. And so it may not seem to you in visiting the facility that we're space constrained. But when everything comes back in at the end of the day, we are. And as we continue to add new equipment as a result of growth in the next number of years, we're going to get to the point where we start to have experience pressures at the fringes. There are remedies to this. The Richmond Green Master Plan, for example, could provide some relief to us. There need to be some coordination. There is some issues internally in terms of continuing to kick the can down the road for measures that may not be critical today, but will become critical at some point in the future. Ultimately, this is really about trying to time measures that and time them in a way that they're consistent and support the growth that we experience. So we flash forward 10 years and we got a whole bunch of new equipment and we got EV vehicles that have come in. Well, guess what? We can't accommodate EV vehicles because we don't have a power source. So those kind of things basically dictate that we need to evolve that facility in light of change in technology, the addition of equipment. Our services may change over time. There may be services that we don't provide today that we plan to provide in the future. And what I'm suggesting is none of that analysis has been done. The 1999 master plan was far too early in the game to be able to forecast what our needs might be for the next 10, 20, or 40 years. And so the way I look at it is we need a game plan that maps out city growth, best case, worst case scenario. what the services are that will be provided during that period of time, and then what the impacts on the yard will be, positive or negative. And with a plan, with a proper laid out long-term plan, we can then start to program in the proper improvements when needed, not sooner than they're needed, but when needed, in order to be able to continue to deliver a good service.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I have to say from my own personal opinion that I know we all took a tour about recently, council was invited to see the winter snow removal, and there were, I think, 30 windrow tractors, which we know are or I believe are underutilized because so I guess when we make decisions about keeping programs like windrow clearing, we don't realize the cost of maintenance and keeping them, and even just the space it takes to keep those things. So I appreciate this discussion, and I wonder, is there ever an accounting of, do we have too many things? Do we have too many pieces of equipment, or is there always a feeling that we don't have enough?
My manager who looks after fleet is with me today. I think what he would tell you is that we try to be both proactive and timely with our requests for added equipment to come into the yard. Much of that equipment, anything that's new, comes out of growth forecast. Generally, the equipment, the way our systems work, generally come in a little bit late. And so I would suggest that it's a rarity that we be out acquiring a piece of equipment and using space in the yard in advance of when it's needed. That would be a rarity. What I would also point out, though, is by doing the needs assessment, that needs assessment, I would hope, would flush out other ways of us being able to provide the space and the resources that are needed for us to continue to function. So, for example, the reason I mentioned the Connor building in Oak Ridges, that becomes a valuable asset for us. It may not be for storage, but using that facility, for example, to launch winter sidewalk equipment, for example, to launch the summer grass cutting from that location. That then is at least a small chunk of equipment that comes out temporarily, is relocated to Oak Ridges, and services Oak Ridges that much sooner than it would if it had to commute up from the operations center. So there are those opportunities in the long term to do things a little bit different. And I said in the presentation, our model is a centralized single hub model. That's not to say that when we flash forward 20 years that will be our model. Maybe at that point we'll be more of a hub and spoke. The operations center is the hub, and there are satellite facilities that then form the spoke. So there are things that can be looked at in the long term.
For you, Mr. Chair, thank you. That was going to be my question. Are satellites sort of the way of the future? And it looks like you're already on that page. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Would you mind to put up the last slide as well? I think it's part of the recommendation, if I remember correctly. Okay. Got it. And well, yeah, I just want to confirm this is the same as the one we have in the staff report. But I also recall maybe a slide before that was talking about maybe breaking it down, or we engage the previous consultant. Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. So, but these are not in the recommendation before us. In particular, I'm looking at the last bullet because this is something to be done next year. So I just want to confirm through Mr. Chair, the 3 points in here, are they captured somewhat in the recommendation between A and F? So that when I vote on it, I know exactly what it is.
Yeah, we had intended to capture it. The one thing I'll point out about the third recommendation, so the design set of all the works is one set, and I have it in my office. It's drawings this thick. And it was packaged at the time as a single set, single contract with the ability of breaking it out. The proposal here is to break out, in particular, the priority would be the civil works. So that was the water, wastewater, stormwater, the paving. Break that contract out, and as a minimum, have that one shovel ready to go. all kinds of reasons that funding may become available to do that early, or even if we don't do it early and stay with the schedule that we have, we think it's still a top priority project. The dollars required to fund that breaking out of the contract already exist. The design assignment that ended in essence in 2020 still has about $140,000 in it. And so we're not accounting for it here in that it's already committed money. And it's money that we're either going to spend a portion of that to fulfill this third bullet, or if we close the assignment, it's money that we return to reserve funds.
Thank you. So just to recap, so that I understand correctly, I'll be voting for the recommendation or motion in front of us. Bullet point number 1 on this slide, number 12, is actually captured in item E of the recommendation. And then a second and third item here is kind of captured under D. Would it be fair characterization of that?
I don't have my staff report in front of me, but I think you're correct.
Okay, yeah, because I remember I saw something on the slide deck, but when I look at the recommendation, hey, where are those ones? So, but it's good to, in the sense that, yeah, there's something that potentially could be going forward, maybe in a smaller chunks or smaller component. So something is moving, which is a positive aspect. And the last thing I would say that as a comment, I support all the recommendation now that I'm clear under what in terms of all those categories or next steps. Yeah, I've been hearing operations center project throughout my 18 years here on council. So this is an ongoing project, and thank you, staff, for continuing with the progress. We can do so much at what we can afford to do. I guess that's what bottom line. Thank you. I will support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. This is certainly something that obviously needs to be done in order to maintain the level of service that happens out of that yard, which is huge. So we have a motion before us. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. And last but not least, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Davidson, go ahead. All those in favor? Opposed?